today's topic is, what is life all about? Now this is a highly elastic, expansive topic which could be analyzed and interpreted from different angles. But I want to primarily speak on what life is all about, the idea or the concept of life according to Vedantic tradition. Now, our idea of life is very much determined by our idea about ourselves and our idea about the external world. These are two interrelated ideas. What we think about ourselves, what we are according to our own understanding, is closely related to what the world is so far as we are concerned. There is a gradual evolution. In the Vedantic tradition, there is a process of evolution. At the most primitive level, one may think of himself or herself as the body, the mind, the intellect, and so on, depending upon his or her level of evolution. The primitive person may think of himself just as this body and mind. Body needs food. For sustenance, it needs shelter from rain, from heat, from weather conditions. But there it ends. And as you evolve further, you may start thinking of yourself as something other than this body, mind, and intellect. Say, in Advaita tradition, there is a famous statement in Shankaracharya's commentary. See, he says, we will never go after anything higher or anything transcendental. We will have no idea of a higher, even intellectual value, not necessarily spiritual, unless we think of ourselves as something other than this body and mind. Sharirendriya Vediriktam Atma means one reality which is distinct and different from Sharira. Sharira means this body, Indriya, the senses. Why should we do charity? Why should we lose money after all? Why should we serve another person? Why should we do selfless service? If you think of yourself as this body, then it is certainly a waste of money, energy, everything. Because this body comes in this life and it disappears in this life itself. So there is an idea of making some kind of a spiritual deposit for future, as we deposit money in bank, expecting that we will be able to draw checks when the times are bad. Similarly, even the most primitive man has an idea of something beyond this body, though he may not confess that he is a believer in God or spirituality. So all ideas of charity, all ideas of anything which goes beyond this body, even poetry, see. Why should we read and enjoy poetry, listen to music, watch a beautiful painting? Because these things do not necessarily benefit our life if we think of ourselves as this physical body. Food we need, shelter we need, but poetry and philosophy and music and literature we don't require for sustenance of this body. So even those who do not openly confess that they believe in God or anything transcendental do go in search of peace outside the visible, the empirical, the phenomenal world. So J.S. Mill, John Stuart Mill, defined the criterion of anything tangible, valuable in this world in terms of the amount of pleasure it brings to our daily life, amount of material pleasure. But even Mill had to admit that to be able to enjoy this world, you have to follow certain ethical rules and regulations. So utilitarian concept of ethics was the result of this view. But that is only a very primitive view from a spiritual standpoint. And as we go further, we feel that there is a need to go in pursuit of something beyond the visible, beyond the empirical, beyond the present, beyond the senses, beyond what is available to us right now at the moment, beyond the present. Now, this is the beginning of philosophy. And where philosophy ends, spirituality begins. So the point where you are convinced that this body is not the whole of human life, there is something beyond this body, you start thinking. You start thinking of a supreme being. That's how the ontological research, ontological inquiry into a supreme being as the origin of the universe, the fundamental cause of the universe begins. So we go in pursuit of something. Normally, there is only one object which everyone wants. It is peace. Peace not outside, but peace within. We won't bother if we are peaceful within ourselves. Even if there is no peace outside, we won't bother. If there is war going on everywhere, still if we are at peace with ourselves, we won't complain about anything. So there utilitarianism comes to an end, where idealism begins. Because utilitarianism admits the need for mental fulfillment, but it doesn't go beyond the body. But idealism begins where utilitarian pragmatism ends. And where idealism ends, spirituality begins. That is why I said earlier, we want to have peace within ourselves. So when you have enough to eat, you have enough shelter, when you have everything going on perfectly well at the bodily, at the material level, then you may go to an art gallery or a museum or a symphony, or you would like to watch the creation of a master, a great painting, listen to a classical piece of music, and so on. Because there we leave the body behind, we leave the mind behind, we leave the intellect behind, and we go in search of something which goes beyond all this. Because mind doesn't need music. Intellect also doesn't explain why we derive enjoyment and peace and happiness from music. So that's why, according to many of the modern thinkers who tell you that goodness, beauty, etc. are values complete in themselves, will tell you that all great classical creations, whether in literature, a book like Brothers of Karamazov by Dostoevsky, or a great drama like Kalidasa's Balavigagnimitra, or a great philosophical literature like Shankaracharya's commentaries, or a great poetry, all these, or a great painting, or a great music, all these give us a peep into the infinite. All this enables us to have a glance at the infinite, which tells us that man is not the body alone, not mind alone, nor intellect alone. Now, as I said earlier, in Vedantic tradition, there are two instrumental values and there are two fundamental values. Truth, beauty, and goodness, as accepted in Western philosophical tradition, are included in dharma and moksha. The two fundamental values which are ends in themselves is, this first one is dharma, which gives us a feeling that this is the right thing that we do. Dharma is vaguely translated as righteousness, but again it becomes an abstract concept. But in reality, dharma is something which tells you from your own inner mind, well, I have done the right thing. And its opposite is something which tells from within yourself, well, this is not wrong which I did. So dharma is a fundamental inner value. But this dharma value belongs to the empirical, because it regulates all our activities in this world. Whatever we do, whatever we think, whatever we speak, if there is an inner conviction within ourselves, well, this is the right thing which I am doing, or this is the right thing which I ought to do, that is dharma. And moksha, the transcendental value, is the ultimate goal of human existence. These are two fundamental values. The value of dharma or righteousness guides our activities, thoughts, and feelings in this world. And the higher transcendental value, the spiritual value, it's called the spiritual enlightenment, the spiritual unfoldment, which is technically called moksha or liberation in Sanskrit language, in Vedantic tradition. It gives you a sense of ultimate goal of human life. And between these, there are two instrumental values. Values which are only instruments, which are only tools, values which do not constitute an end in themselves. One is the tendency to acquire whatever is necessary to fulfill our desire. And the second one is the desires themselves. These two values, these two ideals in life, that is one, whatever we need to make the best of life in this world, and what are the ideals, what are the desires, ambitions that we want to achieve. These two should not be independent of dharma. So anyone who wants to enjoy peace within should pursue the path of artha and kama, means material pleasure and the effort to attain the necessary tools and instruments for enjoying that material pleasure, money, wealth, status, and so on, all these material values, let us say, broadly speaking. Our pursuit of material values should not take us away from the path of dharma or righteousness. If we pursue the path of material prosperity without any regard for the fundamental values of righteousness, ethical values, designated as dharma, then there is one great danger. We may think that material pleasures are ends in themselves. There is nothing beyond that. That will take us away from dharma. See, if material value, material pleasure is the only thing to be achieved in this world, then why should you be ethical? Why can't you steal? Why can't you break the law? Of course, there is the police system is there, but that is a human mechanism. It is not, it is just a human mechanism, a political system or a social system or an administrative system. If one could bypass the law intelligently, then you can do anything you want. But Vedanta says it is not possible. One can never violate the fundamental values of righteousness in his or her pursuit of material pleasure and attain peace within. Because peace comes only when you really start your inquiry for the higher transcendental spiritual value, which is called spiritual enlightenment or spiritual unfoldment, which is designated as liberation in modern English, nirvana in Buddhist tradition, moksha in Vedantic tradition. In Buddhist tradition, nirvana is the end of the cycle of human existence. Human life is not just one road, not one journey. Human life moves in cycles. At the individual level, human life moves in cycles. At the cosmic level, the cosmic existence also moves in cycles. At the individual level, we are the result of what we did in the past. And through our actions today, we are preparing our future. So there is a continuity. Future means next life. So there is a continuity from the past to the present and from the present to the future. So the cycle continues. Now, if you think of existence as a cycle, where does it begin? A cycle has no beginning. A cycle has no end. And it has no middle point also. Unless you think that every point is a beginning and end and middle, you can't analyze a cycle, except as something which is beginningless and endless. Now, there is a way to come out of this cycle. And Vedantic tradition teaches that if one sticks to the values of dharma or righteousness, one can come out of this cycle. Because you can attain spiritual enlightenment, liberation, only when you come out of this cycle. So long as you are within the cycle, this cycle moves on wheeling. It works like this. I shall give a brief analysis of this. There are two interpretations, but I shall take the shorter interpretation. When a person dies, his body comes to an end, but the senses do not come to an end. See, his ears and eyes, these are all senses of perception. Hands and legs, these are all senses of action. They may, of course, vanish, but the tendencies and impressions which these senses have gathered into your mind remain intact. And they are called the subtle body. 5 senses of action, which means the tendencies and impressions that you have gathered in the mind through actions with the 5 senses of action. And again, the impressions and tendencies that you have gathered by the 5 senses of perception. What you have seen, it remains in the mind as a tendency. Because when you see an object with the mind and eye, because eye and mind should come together, then only you can see an object and cognize. Then that leaves an impression in the mind. That remains there. When you hear the same, touch, smell, taste, all these 5 senses of perception function with the help of mind. And they bring tendencies into the mind. They remain intact. So, these are indicated by the 5 senses of action, 5 senses of perception. Not physical senses. The senses in the sense, subtle tendencies and impressions that you have gathered. See, if we have seen something, an object, we want to have, you have a great desire to purchase this, to have that, or to achieve something. But then You could not do that. But the desire is so strong, so powerful. You are ready to sacrifice everything to achieve that object of desire. But you couldn't do that. Now that person may die. What happens to him or her? What happens to the person? He could not achieve it. That desire will remain strongly registered in his mind. And his search for that enjoyment, his efforts to achieve that object of desire will continue in the next life. So if we observe ourselves, what are the strong tendencies that I am displaying? I have not gathered in this life. But there are certain inherent tendencies and impressions which drive me towards certain things. I can't behave in a certain manner. I can't help behaving in a certain manner. See, Swami Vivekananda in one context says, you are good because you can't help being good. You are bad because you can't help being bad. Swami Vivekananda in Karma Yoga lectures may be referring to this point in a very brief reference. Swamiji says, there is an inherent propelling force which drives us from within to behave, act and function in a given manner. It is called, in Sanskrit, it is designated by a very picturesque expression, Anusruta Swabhava. See, actually it means tendencies and vasana, tendencies and impressions which are flowing from your previous life. Anusarati means flowing like a river. It's a river, the current flows one after another. There is a inseparable flow, connection, link between the different ripples and drops of water in an ocean. It flows. There is no break. So, human character is called Anusruta Swabhava. That is very subtle. Even if you try to be different, you can't do that. That's why it is said in Vedanta, in one great statement by Shankaracharya, he says, if a person who is naturally a practitioner of truth, suppose he says, well, I'm going to tell a lie. At the time of telling the lie, he will be telling only truth. He can't help it. On the other hand, people who are naturally used to telling lies, if he works very hard, thinks and comes to a strong decision, well, I'm going to tell the truth. When he starts speaking, it will be a lie only. So there are certain inner currents and tendencies and impressions which define, decide, determine and propel our mind in a given direction. So that means these tendencies and impressions have been gathered sometime in the past, not in this life, and put there in that spiritual bank mind where all these tendencies and impressions have been accumulated. And in this life, they are coming to the surface. So, the 17 elements which constitute the subtle body, which moves in the cycle, are these 5 senses of action, 5 senses of perception. Not physical senses, but tendencies and impressions gathered into the mind, accumulated in the mind through actions involving these 5 senses of action and 5 senses of perception. And then another important the 5 vital energies, how they function, because they are also determined. The way we breathe, the way we interact with the external world, all these are determined by our inherent character. And then mind and intellect. So these 17 elements, 17 factors constitute the subtle body. So that's why, as I said some time back, whatever we do will not be lost, good and bad. Therefore, as I said earlier, if a person pursues his search, his inquiry, or his pursuit of material pleasure, if he deviates from the path of righteousness, he creates a disturbance, a ripple in this wheel of in this rotating wheel. On the other hand, if he upholds the principles of righteousness, ethical and moral values, which are broadly designated by the word dharma, then he gets an opening to come out of this wheel. And the moment you come out of this wheel, the path to liberation is open. That's why belief in a higher transcendental value has got a great effect in our mind. This world is something that we experience every day. We live in this world. We are part of this world. But still, if we can think, well, whatever I pursue is not eternal. There is something beyond this. You may not have realized what is beyond this. You may not have reached that goal. But the idea that whatever we see around, these material things are not ends in themselves. There is something beyond this. This is a higher transcendental idealism. Even Kant reached up to that point. Kant says, thing in itself, or we call things in themselves, whatever we may call, because he was not Advaitin, he was, there is an element of Advaita, non-dualism, and also plurality in his concept. He said, this is something which is transcendental, and it is unknown, it is unknowable. Vedanta says, it is unknown, yes, to the five senses and mind. But it cannot be known in the sense it could be objectified, because the higher reality cannot be objectified. It cannot be known or cognized by the mind and the senses. But at the same time, it is our own inner nature. It is within. It is the immanent reality within all of us. It is the omnipresent reality. It is transcendental reality. It is the immanent reality, which Vedanta calls the highest transcendental value. So these are the four values which guide human life. And as I said earlier, every human being has a feeling of imperfection with the present world. That's why I said, you go to a library and read a sublime poetry because you are not satisfied with what you see with your eyes around. So you want to take refuge in something which is not very, very material. Poetry, if you read Wordsworth, Wordsworth speaks about the beauty of nature. But you may not be able to enjoy the beauty of nature the way Wordsworth did. But when you read it, you feel a joy and happiness and blissfulness which you won't feel if you eat an ice cream or something, which is something beyond the senses. And also philosophy. The higher philosophy, spiritual ideas are to be realized. Every great philosopher says. It doesn't mean that you should not read it. So even if you have not realized it, just reading higher philosophy, just getting intellectually acquainted with these ideas, takes our mind away from the senses, from the world of senses. In other words, they give you temporary freedom from the clutches, from the tyranny of senses. That's why there are two approaches at this stage. One, you give complete freedom to your senses, which means spiritual anarchy. Or you try to get freedom from senses, which means spiritual liberation. It's the path to spiritual liberation. If you give freedom to the senses, it is spiritual anarchy. We are going backward in evolution. And if you follow that path, perhaps you may go back to the chimpanzee level from which human beings are supposed to have evolved, to the animal kingdom. But on the other hand, if we approach, if we take the path of freedom from senses, then that's a royal highway to spiritual liberation, spiritual enlightenment. All the great spiritual personalities the world has produced, whether Buddha, Shankara, Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, Vivekananda, Jesus, anybody, all these great men, they were all trying to prepare a road for humanity to take the path which takes you to freedom from the tyranny of senses. Now, peace which human beings are seeking is possible only if one gets freedom from senses. You may not reach the goal, but even an effort, even a humble effort to get freedom from senses gives you a feeling of joy, happiness, and blissfulness. I can give an example. I read an article on the Hare Krishna movement, ISKCON movement in Soviet Union. Recently I read hundreds, maybe thousands of people shaving their head and sandal paste on their forehead, jumping up and down, doing kirtans, loudly shouting Hare Krishna with cymbals, all kinds of musical instruments, and marching through the streets of Moscow or St. Petersburg. Of course, they had to face some opposition also. I won't go into those details. Now there is an article. Why then? An eminent psychologist had an interview with the leader, who is a Russian intellectual who was previously connected to the Russian Orthodox Church, who are not well known for their broad-mindedness, Now, this person was a professor in a university, this leader of this movement. He said, and he was a member of the, follower of the Russian Orthodox Church. He said, he made an inquiry with many of these people. When they chanted these names and when they just came out in the streets, loudly shouting these kirtans, they felt as if they were free from themselves. Many of them were depressed with the material conditions. So whenever they do this kind of devotional practices, they felt a kind of bliss or happiness. So I'm just giving an example, just a very physical, not very subtle spiritual practice like meditation or introspection. Even a very physical effort to get out of the tyranny of senses gives a feeling of bliss and happiness. In the 6th chapter of Gita, Arjuna puts an important question before Krishna. In fact, Arjuna is taking up the role of a representative of the common masses of the world. Many of them perhaps are not advanced in their spiritual life. Here Arjuna asks a question to Krishna, his teacher. He says, now you have taught me all these spiritual ideas and I may try to practice. But what happens to me if I don't succeed? That's the important goal. Now this question is very crucial if you think that life is only one. You see, if life is just one road and you travel, at the end of the road, everything is closed. Either you are admitted to hell or heaven. Then this is a terrible thing actually. If you fail, it means damnation once for all. There is certainly no way out. You are permanently jailed in hell. So Arjuna was not aware of the dynamics of Vedantic evolution at that point. So he puts this question, what happens to those who fail, who fall by the wayside, who die without or before attaining their goal? So, ayadi shraddhayopedo yoga chalida manasaha Aprapya yoga samsiddhim kam gadim Krishna gacchati. These are words I should translate into English. The question is this: somebody who doesn't succeed in controlling the senses, somebody who makes a sincere effort, you try to meditate, you you practice introspection and so on, but then still you feel restless and you are sure that you have not succeeded in that. What happens to that person if he dies? What will be his fate? What will be the destiny? What will be the terrible fate waiting for him? It's implication. Kam gati means what fate, what destiny is waiting for him, the one who fails. In answer to this question, Krishna gives a great promise. In fact, the burden of the promise is this: whatever little you do, it will be enough for this life. Because this life is not the only life you have got. That's an important point. See, whatever little you have done will remain in the spiritual bank. If you do meditation for 5 minutes in this life, if you read a good scripture which tells you about spiritual ideas for half an hour in this life, and led a wayward life, bohemian life for the rest of your life, even if you have done one good deed, if you're walking in the street, you helped somebody, even the least bit of charity, least effort towards spiritual enlightenment, anything that is good, any good charitable deed for anybody living outside, any unselfish act of charity or kindness or compassion you have done to anyone in this world, or even the least effort you have made towards your own spiritual progress, listening to a good lecture, reading a good book for some time, listening to an elevating music or devotional hymn, or even contemplation for a few minutes in this life, it will not be lost. Krishna says, you may die without attaining your goal. Next life, this good deed will start producing its result. See, if you sow a seed somewhere in a desert, in a dry place, and after some time the rain comes down, maybe that seed may sprout and becomes a tree, which is possible. But on earth, this may not be possible, in the physical earth. But in spiritual life, this is inevitable. That's the point which Krishna stresses. Whatever little effort you make, it's like a seed which will invariably sprout and become a mighty tree, producing its wonderful fruits sometime in future. Which means even the least effort is not wasted. There is no such thing as a wasted effort in spiritual life. And in answer to this, he says, well, it will not be lost. And the next life, when you are born, this tendency, this impression, which you have gathered in your mind through this good deed, spiritual effort, will come to the surface. And that will force you to continue this effort again. So it will make you, it will become a strong character, an inherent character, which will force you to continue the effort in next life. And it will go on. That means no effort is wasted. Because life is not a straight line, it's a cycle. It is a wheel. Because it continues its momentum. This is the great promise which Krishna gives in the 6th chapter of Gita. Which means, as I said earlier, our view of our own personality, our own nature, and our understanding of the external world are both interrelated, inseparably interrelated. What we are within ourselves determines what we see in the external world. And if a person can make an effort towards attaining peace from within, he will naturally experience peace outside. And for that, we have got time, energy, inherited tendencies, impressions. All days should be diverted towards some kind of spiritual effort, spiritual practice. It could be reading, it could be listening, or some effort to take the mind away from the clutches of senses. An effort to liberate the mind from the tyranny of the senses. As I said earlier, freedom given to senses leads to spiritual anarchy, spiritual suicide. But even the least effort to get freedom from the tyranny of senses takes us to a spiritual liberation. Even if we don't reach that goal in this life, even the least effort will have its momentary effect. What is that effect? That effect is a feeling of peace, happiness, and blissfulness within. Even that's why any effort to run away from your own senses is associated with a feeling of bliss and happiness. Even when you, as I said earlier, when you listen to sublime poetry recitation or a music or watch wonderful painting, suddenly you forget everything. Why? When you forget everything, you are forgetting the senses. You are getting temporary freedom from the tyranny of the senses. And the moment mind is liberated from the tyranny of the senses, it enjoys peace within, blissfulness within, and it also experiences contentment outside. I have just tried to approach this subject from a rather informal standpoint. It's a very brief time space. Within that, I have tried to give some ideas, and in some future talks, I shall continue the discussion, maybe under another title. So thank you. Namaskar.